Hey all, it's been a couple days. Still working on these pages, slowly but surely. I got this one done, page 3. Like that's the level of finish that I'm aiming for these. So it's taken a bit of time. I noticed that it felt like it was taking a lot longer, and then it dawned on me this is the first instance that I've drawn or painted any like rooms, and all the weaving around various items is taking more time than I would have anticipated just on the basis of what I've been doing in my sketchbooks. So, one of those things that comes along only through the process. Earlier, I went ahead and flatted these Barnaby figures with a combination of was it yellow ochre and white and gray. All these colors I've been kind of dialing down a bit, muting them a bit with gray in this whole scene, just to make them a little more neutral. And because it's in the basement and it's kind of a darker space, but I don't want to just bury it in shadow. Like I want things to be visible, so I'm trying to neutralize the colors a little bit. I'm not sure if I'm getting it right. This panel I kind of blew out with purple. This panel, but it really pops that yellow out and orange. So, it's just one of those learning processes. Trying to figure it out, trying to feel how much flexibility I want to put into any given panel. Do I want it to be the same exact color every single background, or can I play with it a little bit? And in film they play with it a lot, and it doesn't really hurt the general feeling of the films. So I don't know. It's just one of those things that now that I'm actually working on comics, and this happens on plenty of projects. Now that I'm working on the actual pages, I just got to kind of feel stuff out a little bit more and see how it works, and adjust accordingly. So right now I'm going in with just yellow ochre and doing a little bit of highlighting around the edges, adding some form to his fur. I've kind of developed this technique where I'll put in the flat color and gray it up a bit, neutralize it a bit, and then come back in with the same color in pure form, and use that for highlights. Well, not highlights, but like forms. And it works pretty well and adds a nice bit of contrast and texture. And it's a pretty simple technique. And that is always one of the things about comics. You gotta figure out a simple version of how to attack it and still get what you want out of the technique, because you just don't have a lot of time to spend on any given panel. So time management becomes a serious concept for you to deal with. And that goes into every aspect, whether it's layout and penciling or perspective or inking or any of that. You got to figure out through trial and error what you want as an artist and what techniques best achieve that. Some people might call that sort of thing shortcuts, and sometimes that is, sometimes it just fakes it. But if it doesn't hurt the story, then who gives a shit? If it doesn't draw attention to itself and the readers don't care. recently had that theory nailed home for me watching some of Jim Lee's Twitch videos. They're on YouTube when I watched them, but he ported them over from Twitch, and you know, he'd spend like an hour, hour and a half on a figure of like Superman or, you know, whoever, and then spend 20 minutes on this gigantic, heavily detailed cityscape and just blow it in with a ruler and his pencil. And, you know, definitely something that came with experience of doing the job for decades. But, you know, it was just fascinating that the thing that I thought would take him ages was the thing that he blew through the fastest, and then vice versa. The thing that I figured would be quick took him forever. And many erasures and iterations, and so it was eye-opening. These little figures. So doing these little figures gets tricky real quick because they are so small you cannot detail them heavily, and they just look muddy when you do. So it's a matter of getting that balance. It's a matter of figuring out where do you want the purple to do the shadow work, where do you want the darker version of the color to be the highlight. You know, like here on the tip of the tail, it's already against that purple in the behind. So if I put the tip of the tail with the yellow ochre, I really shouldn't do it with the purple on his belly. Maybe just a little there. That way there's more depth. Because if I put all of it, it'll just flatten it all out. I'm letting the purple do its job. I'm letting the yellow ochre do its job. And of course the flatted color is the base. So it's already there covering everything. So that's one of those instances where it's very quick to overdo it. Now, specifically with Barnaby, because he's got these, they're super muted in this panel, but you can kind of see them. He's got these stripes. Fuck, I just left that on the wedding. Yeah, it's dry. Yeah, I'm good. Because he's got these stripes, and because I want it to be relatively muted, I think those were brown. On some of my sketches, I added a bit of orange, so it would play with the brown. But I think for these, I just went straight brown. So I think that's, I'm looking at my palette. There's some brown with some low-key brown there. I don't know if I used that for his fur. I want to say no. I think I just used a really diluted brown. We'll see how it works. Dab a little bit and see if it plays right. I do know I diluted it pretty heavily, so I got my erasing brush. I saw Beatrice Miller. No, Tiller. It's French, so I'm probably completely butchering that, but her name and her. She did, on Instagram, she shows several videos of her watercolor work, and I'm looking at my other page to see how I layered on these things. And yeah, it's pretty brown. So she would dab on the color and then dab it back off with a second brush that I assume is kind of white or wet, like this is not, and make these very intricate and subtle gradients, and blends them in just gently, and it was just gorgeous. Very time consuming because you know, you spend so much time pushing it on and then pulling it back off, and you know, just dab. feel like that is a little bit more, like I blew it out or neutralized it a little bit more on the other panel, so I'm going to pull it in a little bit more brown or gray. Let's see how this goes. With, somebody like Barnaby, you can do this sort of experimentation, and if it doesn't work well, I mean, the texture of the fur, all the little highlights and stuff like that, you can play with it a little bit more than you normally would on just like skin tones, because it doesn't really show it as quick. You can hide it easier. So, I'm being a little more cavalier with it. And then this is, I'm actually using this a little more for the form than I am for the stripes, but it's working. So, all right, stripes. Which I did a lot of stripes on the other one, so I'm not that, or a lot of form on the other one. So I'm not gonna beat myself up too much about it. Let's see. One of the fun things about this project is the cat. My older daughter loves cats, and of course, I can work on these pages around the girls, which is a new thing because my other stuff is a bit more grown up, not something I was comfortable working around them with. And my older daughter has special needs, and she forgets things pretty quickly sometimes. And she just keeps telling me every time she sees these pages that you draw cats so good. You're so good at it. Which, I'm super glad that she's enjoying it. Gets a little tired hearing it all the time, but it's one of those things as a parent you just gotta kind of suck up and go with. Alright, so that actually flattened out some of that yellow ochre I had put down. So I'm going to let it dry, move on to the next one. I don't have a ton of the darker gray or brown gray left, so I'm just going to play with the brown, especially on this panel, because it's, the stripes are pretty much just on his body. That's too thick. Being that I'm relatively new to watercolor, I've gotten about 5 months in on it, really. I'm still getting the handle on dialing in the saturation levels, the water levels. I guess dilution levels would be the appropriate term. So, it's... That's too much, damn it. There, all right. Just trying to find that sweet spot where the paint works the way I want it to in any given circumstance. I started off using really thick paint, and I think that was a direct reflection of the fact that I actually started off using acrylic and watering it down, which acrylic you can layer in for days and it doesn't really do anything to the underlying layers. And watercolor is the opposite. I found, especially with this brand, it tends to push the underlying layers around a lot if you're not moving quickly, and which I've used to my advantage. I mean, it basically works as erasing too, and I can use that very nicely in certain areas. But it is a trick to get to the right degree, to get the right effect that I'm aiming for, because sometimes the shit underneath just starts wiggling around when I don't want it to, and it gets very frustrating. I might leave those to. Alright, cool. Stripes. I like the watermarks on the stripes, but it's a matter of getting that good, proper balance out of it. And also, I'm trying to move along pretty quickly, so I don't want to run back into something that it's still wet. So I'm letting it sit for a half second and then coming back with the other brush to pull it out. Not just soften it up in this instance, but to just move it along in the drying process a little bit. So one of the things that I've learned on these pages, I've been doing 4 pages at the same time, which you may have seen in my other videos or whatever, but that worked decently well when I was still in the just figuring out colors stage and flatting and throwing all the color on. But as I was working into the details, I noticed that it really started slowing me down, moving. Needs a little more purple in there. Moving from page to page like that, it allowed for a lot of drying and was being generally efficient with time, just to not try and sit and wait on a page to dry or whatever. But then when I started getting into the more detailed aspects of each panel, it got confusing to try and remember, okay, well, this panel needs this and that panel needs that, and I forgot to do this like I left Barnaby's nose off on that one panel, and it's okay, looking at it later, because I spent a lot of time just chilling out and analyzing what I've worked on and seeing where it's at and mental notes on how to keep working on it. So it's a process there, but the detail work definitely bogs down when I work this way. So I think I'm going to adjust and maybe just do 2 pages at a time. That way I still can alternate, but I'll feel a little more overall focused. I started off doing these 4 pages. I actually started off doing 8 pages. The double page spreads at each end of this scene are, one's in the breakdown stage and the other one's in the layout stage, so it's ready to ink. Okay, those stripes are dead. Bring them up a bit. But it just got too overwhelming trying to take care of all those pages at once. So I think the 2 pages at once will be a nice balance. And now that I've gotten a better understanding of approach, especially with like approaching for a room and whatnot, I'll feel a little more comfortable there. That's too wet or too dry. Damn it, now it's too dry. Or what? The other thing. It's too much the other thing. I want it to be the thing, and it's the other thing. All right. done. Still debating on what to do with that purple in the background because it's very, very vibrant. And it doesn't coordinate with the rest of the background colors at all, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just, it blows out very, very loudly. And it does add a nice bit of tension to the scene, which is what I'm aiming at overall. But I'm not sure. Just not sure. All right. I'm at 21 minutes. I think I mean, that's basically my overall technique, specifically with Barnaby, but also kind of everything. Just the purple for the shadow, the flat color, oftentimes dialed back with gray, and then come back with that natural color, pure color that is, and then layer that on top to give some highlight and some form, and then come back with a third variation on the flat color, usually something darker. So like here you can see I haven't, on these panels I used, for Idris I used, if you can, there, I used more brown. So I went with the purple for the shading, excuse me, which I didn't do anything but the purple on the shirt, so you can see kind of what that looks like. Purple for the shading, and then for her I use a light orange, and I dialed that back with some gray and maybe some white to do the flat, and then I kind of modeled that just a little bit again on top of it. And then I went back with some Van Dyke brown, and I think I dialed it back with some gray as well, and then I used that to give these bits of shadow. So it doesn't necessarily lay directly on top of all the purple, but it sort of plays with the purple to create a more gradiated shadow. Like here it's almost pure purple, in the armpit it's almost, this bit's purple, and then this is nice dark brown. Here on the shoulder it's more the brown, that sort of thing. So it's playing with the three different colors, letting the light kind of modulate and demonstrate the form quite a bit. Here on the neck is a good example. So brown, brown, purple. So it feels like the light is coming in at it, even though it demonstrates form very quickly, but it's a very simplistic demonstration. And it looks like my phone's close to dying, so I'm going to cut this off now. Cheers, y'all. Thank you for watching. Hope you subscribe and like.